Welcome to the auditorium of the Cohesion Parish School. I am Michelle Arthur, and I will be your host this evening, and the person who will be introducing the special invited guests for this program, which is, of course, the book launch of Policing Dynamic Barbados by Mr. Bertie A. Hinds. We'll start by having a prayer from Reverend Selwyn Lowe, the rector of All Saints Church, and also a former police officer.
As this book prepares to be launched into the market, we pray that sales will be over and above expectation. Let it reach lands far and wide in every household. Let it be a blessing to one and all. And we pray, God, that in doing so, that we will find comfort in it. And so we commit this evening's proceedings into your hands. And we ask you, Lord, now to go before us in all our doings with your most gracious favor. Further us with your continual help, that in all thy work begun, continue, and ended in thee, may continue to glorify your holy name. All this we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Together we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thine will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May God bless this book and shower it with everlasting blessing. Amen.
I now invite Professor Velma Newton, the Director of Impact Justice, to come and deliver opening remarks.
I have a protocol list here, but since we are all wearing masks, sometimes it is difficult to recognize persons. Anyway, here we go. Sir David Simmons, former Chief Justice of Barbados. Mr. Keith Simmons, you see, former Minister of Home Affairs. Mr. Orville Durant, former Commissioner of Police. I'll just read the list. Colonel Blind Granham, Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defense Force. Mr. Tyrone Griffith, Commissioner of Police. Mr. Anthony Wood, former Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Adriel Brathwaite, former Attorney General of Barbados. Sir Trevor Carmichael. Mrs. Sonia Goodrich, Principal of the Cornish Parish School. Professor Justin Robinson, Faculty of Social Sciences, UE. Mrs. Katura Hinds, wife of Mr. Bertie Hinds, and other family of Mr. Hinds. Mrs. Angela Edwards, manageress, Eddie's Trading. Mr. Tony Pickering, Hotel Foods. Friends and well-wishers of Mr. Bertie Hinds. Good afternoon. I'm extremely pleased to be associated with this event, the launch of Policing a Dynamic Barbados, written by Bertie Hinds, policeman, sociologist, historian, criminologist, scholar, and keen observer of events not only in Barbados, but in the entire region, and also a seemingly quick and accurate judge of persons in his main field of endeavor, policing. I really did not know Mr. Hinds very well until about 2 years ago, when as Regional Director of the Canadian-funded Impact Justice Project, I was looking for someone to prepare and deliver a refresher course for policemen and women across the region on evidence, report writing, interrogation, and investigating techniques. His name was suggested by police officers and others from at least 4 countries who had been associated with him in his role as Deputy Executive Director of the Regional Security System, and who knew or had heard of his outstanding qualifications as a police officer. That he was also a part-time lecturer in the Faculty of Social Sciences, UE Cayfield campus, or had heard him present papers at police and other security conferences. In fact, as far as I know, he's one of the few scholar police officers in the region. Over the course of a year, Mr. Hinds was the main trainer in a refresher course offered by Impact Justice in St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Because of scheduling difficulties, we were unable to offer the course in Dominica and Belize as planned. Altogether, he would have offered a refresher training to about 150 police officers. The training was well received, especially the component dealing with report writing, which many of the participants acknowledged was a problem area in their police forces. The interaction between Mr. Hinds and the participants also revealed that interrogation and investigation techniques differed from country to country. Mr. Hinds also attended a planning session which Impact Justice and the Jurist Project, which is also funded by the Government of Canada, held in Barbados in February this year. And he made a number of recommendations in relation to pretrial procedures for police officers. So, with all the training that he received, especially since the 1980s, which is mentioned in the tribute to the author, written by Keith Simmons QC, his experience in just about every field of policing and his scholarly inclination, it is not surprising that Mr. Hinds has been the recipient of honors, including the OBE in 2014 and the Queen's Jubilee Medal for his invaluable contribution to policing and security in the Caribbean. It is also not surprising that in retirement, Mr. Hinds took up his pen, as he said, to fill the void in research and writing on policing in Barbados, and among the other objectives, to attempt to demystify the misplaced notion that policing is not an intellectual endeavor, and to bring an added dimension to the ongoing and necessary debate as to what an effective police organization should be. I know that others will be speaking on the contents of this book, which is extraordinarily wide-ranging in the aspects of policing and Barbadian society with which it deals. But I would like to speak briefly on one aspect, and that is domestic violence, which the author examines on pages 146 to 152 of the book. So you have to buy it to see what I'm talking about. He quotes from a recent UN publication which found that domestic violence is the second most important problem confronting states today, surpassed only by terrorism. He goes on to say that prior to 1992, the well-to-do hardly reported acts of domestic violence to the police, but since then, because of a suite of legislation, including the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act, the Sexual Offences Act of 1992, and amendments to this Act, and the Offences Against the Person Act of 2016, the hands of the police have been strengthened. They can now provide advice and counseling to victims of domestic violence and enter premises without a warrant to assist anyone in imminent danger of or who has suffered physical injury at the hands of someone else on the premises. He also mentions the establishment of a family conflict intervention unit in Barbados in 2013 and sets out its terms of reference, including provision for its management. I was pleased to see that Mr. Hinds emphasized the importance of this unit. The government of Barbados has not yet given the nod to the implementation of community mediation by considering a model bill drafted by Impact Justice, which has received the blessings of the Legal Affairs Committee of the CARICOM Secretariat. But recently, Impact Justice reached out to the Commissioner of Police and the head of the Family Conflict Intervention Unit to see how the project and the police could work together using a group of Impact Justice volunteers to mediate some of the family conflict cases taken to the unit. Recently, Impact Justice trained officers attached to the unit in mediation, and we are now prepared to see how we can deepen the relationship. Through community mediation, some cases can be settled quickly and at little or no cost to persons who have issues, and it would avoid the expense and time spent in going to court. I really hope that a meaningful contribution to the solution of some conflicts in Barbados can be made by the Family Court Conflict Intervention Unit and the Impact Justice Project working together. Having said that, I will congratulate Mr. Hinds for a well-written, witty, and informative book on policing in Barbados, which is relevant to policing in the entire Caribbean. I would like him to know that Impact Justice will purchase multiple copies for presentation to commissioners of police in other Caribbean countries. We will do so in the hope that these commissioners would encourage their police officers, senior and junior, to make the most of educational opportunities which present themselves in the way that Ms. Hinds did, and to be constantly assessing the delivery of services and execution of their jobs to ensure that they respect and protect human dignity and uphold the human rights of all persons while serving the community and protecting it against illegal acts. Thank you all for listening.
Is a former Minister of Justice. Simmons?
Bertie, my friend, this book entitled Policing a Dynamic Barbados is a masterpiece and very timely. We met when you were the prosecutor at the Whole Town Magistrates Court and I the presiding magistrate. I recognized then and was impressed with your ability. You always had a good grasp of the matter at hand, and your presentation of the evidence made my task at reaching a decision extremely easy. In one particular case, an accused man who served a term of imprisonment of 2 years said to Bertie, "Bertie, you are an honest policeman." That showed respect that he demanded. Bertie, congratulations to you. When you decided to write this book, you requested me to write the tribute, and I read it now. Towards the end of the decade of the 1960s, when his sojourn at his alma mater, the now Corazon Parish School in St. Peter, Barbados, was coming to an end, the idea of becoming a police officer sprung to his mind. Digressing momentarily, it must be emphasized that his alma mater has produced governors general, prime ministers, central bank governors, a Lord Bishop, permanent secretaries, and of course several senior police officers. Many of those who were the authors, seniors, went on to join the constabulary. There caught his eye for the professional and authoritative appearance in uniform and mufti. He was convinced beyond a shadow of doubt that he had to wear the badge. That created such a profound impression on him. Aged barely 18 years, when he marched out of his alma mater, he was snapped up by the Ministry of Education as a supernumerary teacher, while eyeing the age of 18 and a half years threshold for joining the constabulary. The ensuing months seemed agonizingly long. As that day dawned, he put in his application at the Office of Training Officer, Assistant Superintendent Sinclair Jones. But to his consternation, he was rejected on the grounds that he would better serve the teaching or banking professions because of his academic qualifications of 5 general certificates of education at ordinary level subjects. A clear message from the recruiting and training officer that he was overqualified for the job he so badly needed. Perseverance seldom fails, the old adage says. Within 6 months of his rejection, he reapplied and was accepted, having been told by the recruiting officer, "Your persistence has won me over." He rose through the ranks of the Deputy Commissioner of Police, holding that office from 2004 to 2013, when he took early retirement. On leaving his alma mater, he entered the Barbados Teaching Service, where he spent a year, after which he joined the Royal Barbados Police Force. He graduated from the Regional Police Training Centre at Civil Christchurch, Barbados, as best recruit. During his tenure, he worked in every operational department of the force. Some of his early signature postings were with Traffic Enforcement, Criminal Investigations Department, Station and Substation Management, Court Prosecutions, Head Research and Development, and Staff Officer to the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Durant, who I think is here. Yes. On entering the gazetted ranks, he commanded operational divisions, both uniform and CID, and held the title of Assistant Accreditation Officer when the force commenced its successful pursuit of international law enforcement accreditation from 1990 to 1997. The force is the first and only one in the Anglophone Caribbean to be so accredited. He benefits from a wide range of operational training and executive leadership training. The training included command training at the prestigious Police Staff College, Bramshill, UK, and the Institute of Police Technology, North Florida State University, USA. He went on a personal excursion of self-development, first attaining a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Law with honors, and successfully completing the Certificate in Human Resource Management program from the University of the West Indies, Cape Hill campus. Prior to obtaining the certificate, he received a Master of Arts degree in Criminology from the Scarman Centre for the Study of Public Order, University of Leicester, England. While serving as a police officer, he became the first and only member of the force to date to lecture in criminal justice, criminology, and police studies at the University of the West Indies, Cape Hill campus. He continued as a part-time lecturer until 2016. In 2014, he was awarded the Order of the British Empire for his outstanding contribution to policing in Barbados. In that same year, the title of Justice of Peace was conferred on him, as well as the Queen's Jubilee Medal for his invaluable contribution to policing and security in the Caribbean. In 1992, as head of research and development, he wrote a position paper entitled Policing the Caribbean 1992 and Beyond for the Association of Caribbean Commissioners of Police for presentation to the West Indian Commission. He has presented several papers on behalf of the force and the government of Barbados in the local, regional, and international arenas. On his retirement from the police force, he joined the regional security system as its deputy executive director. He delimited his office in 2016 after a successful and satisfying stint. His portfolio at RSS afforded him the opportunity to gain greater knowledge of policing and security in the Caribbean region. At the time of leaving the RSS, he was managing the development of the RSS Common Policing Standards 2015. He is the Managing Director of BAA Consulting, a registered business in Barbados specializing in criminal justice, criminology, police studies, and crime and security management. He began writing Policing the Dynamic Barbados in February 2017 and has now realized his dream of publishing this work. An experienced and successful criminal justice practitioner, he served as chairman of the Prison Advisory Board of Barbados from 2013 to 2016, and as deputy chairman of the Board of Management of his alma mater, Courage and Pride, of course, from 2008 to 2018. He's affiliated to several non-governmental organizations and is a cricket enthusiast, not a cricketer, a cricket enthusiast. This book, Policing a Dynamic Barbados, should be compulsory, yes, compulsory reading by the recruits of the Regional Police Training Center, CEBAL, the Regional Security System, as part of their training material. I recommend it also to be read by Prime Ministers, Attorneys General, and Commissioners of Police throughout the region. For sure, because of its educational and historic value. It should also be a text in the 5th and 6th forms of secondary schools throughout the region. I am the son of a police officer. Orville, and in your book, Bertie, and in your book, my father's name is mentioned as one of 3 blacks that have been promoted to the rank of superintendent in Barbados in 1950. That shows the depth of your research. Congratulations, Bertie. And I want to conclude by thanking you on behalf of all of us here to have had the opportunity to read your book and hope that the sales of it go very, very well. Thank you.
Former Minister Simmons, former Commissioner Durant, Professor Justin Robinson, retired gazetted officers of the Royal Barbados Police Force, distinguished guests, of course, Mr. Hinds and Mrs. Hinds, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here this evening at the Courage and Parry School. My first visit to this school. And I had traveled with my blazer, but I took a decision to leave it in the car because my blazer has on a foundation crest. And I wasn't certain that what the security implications of that might have been. But I'm very, very pleased to be here this evening and, of course, honored to have been asked to make a few remarks on the very splendid book written by Bertie Hinds, Policing a Dynamic Barbados. I really should begin by congratulating him on producing so great a work. I always remember that the English philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once said that Plato had written everything that was of any importance in philosophy. And therefore, all the philosophers who wrote after Plato were just writing footnotes to Plato. I'm aware that Policing a Dynamic Barbados is a foundational production because I am not aware of any other book on the history of the Royal Barbados Police Force written by somebody who was actually practicing the craft in the Royal Barbados Police Force, or for that matter by anybody else. And therefore, I feel able to say that hereafter, when people come to write about the Royal Barbados Police Force, anything they have to write will just be footnotes to policing a dynamic Barbados. And talking about Plato, of course, it was he who, in envisioning his own republic, contemplated a republic with three broad classes of people: a class of producers, made up of people like artisans and fishermen and farmers and tradesmen. And they were supposed to be practitioners of a virtue called temperance. And then he contemplated also a class of persons whom he called the guardian class. And they were supposed to be responsible for protecting other people in the society. And they were supposed to be guided by a virtue called fortitude. And then those persons who were supposed to be responsible for governing the republic, the philosopher kings, they were supposed to practice a virtue called prudence. So the Royal Barbados Police Force has been the guardian class, using Plato's formulation, for some considerable time now. The force was established, I think, in 1835, the year after the Emancipation Act came into effect. And I suspect that time is fortuitous because it was thought at the time that persons who were slaves for so long had to be taught how to be free, and you couldn't risk leaving them to themselves in that connection, so you needed a police force to regulate them in those circumstances. I note that Bertie ignored the period 1835 to 1940, but he did so with justification, because between 1838, the end of the apprenticeship period in Barbados, or rather the beginning of the apprenticeship period in Barbados, sorry, the end of the apprenticeship period, and 1938, the year after the riots here, nothing much of significance had changed in Barbados. Yes, the laws authorizing slavery had been abolished, but the laws were not the only thing. Plantations were still here, and planters were still here, and merchants were still here. And that merchant planter elite was still influencing outcomes at every level in this society. So, policing the guardian class, the Royal Barbados Police Force between 1835 and 1938 would have been looking after the interests of planters and merchants, and therefore wouldn't have had much to do with the welfare of the broad mass of people in this society. So 1940, the 1940s was a very good place to start this very seminal study. Obviously, in the 1940s, the riots had just happened, and the imperial government had become aware that people in this region, people in this country, were concerned about the social and economic conditions under which they had to live, social, economic, and political conditions. And therefore, a slightly different attitude to policing had to take place, because the masses had sent a signal that if things did not change, that the imperial government might hear from them again. And what Bertie called the threshold years, therefore, began. Well, it's not a period, according to the book, and I agree with him entirely, when very much happened at the level of policing to benefit the average man and woman in Barbados. Policing was focused on enforcement, and was usually enforcement against ordinary people in villages and communities in Barbados. So it was really a continuation, minor modifications of what had been happening for the 100 years that went before. And then along came what he called the first great transformation under Commissioner Orville Druin. I'm very pleased to see him here this evening. I think his presence in the context of the launch of this book lends a particular enhancement to this occasion, because he recognized what the society needed and decided that he was going to make a number of things happen. And he brought the police force much closer to the society. He made the police force an expression of the aspirations and the dreams and the hopes of people in the society, and created a number of institutions that have long survived his own incumbency, which ended, I think, in 1995. Neighborhood watches are still around, community policing is still around, and so many other things that he did for the Royal Barbados Police Force are still around. But that first great transformation gave the masses of Barbados for the first time an understanding that a police force did not have to be an adversary of people. It could work with people and help them to realize their dreams and their aspirations in the society. So I think in the context of policing a dynamic Barbados, none but the churlish will want to deny that Orville Druin's contribution to policing in Barbados is deserving of our enduring gratitude. And I want to thank him for all that he has done. Things was coming to an end, and of course in 1995, his incumbency came to an end, and he was succeeded by Mr. Grantley Watson, who was his understudy and who therefore was aware of all of the programs that were being put in place to humanize policing in Barbados. And therefore he carried on Mr. Druin's work and did that with distinction. Of course, international accreditation of the police force had started under Mr. Druin, but so committed was Mr. Watson to that ideal, he having worked with Mr. Druin in formulating it in the first place, that he saw it through to conclusion. And that moved the Royal Barbados Police Force from being just a local institution to an internationally acknowledged institution. And it has kept that profile. A few reverses from time to time, but it has kept that profile to this very day. Obviously, institutions have to be responsive to the changes that are taking place around them. Institutions have life, they breathe, they need to be nurtured, and they need to be kept in sync with the institution, with the countries and the environments which they have to serve. And so too has it been with the Royal Barbados Police Force. It has gone through many changes, because the society itself has been going through many changes. Up to the year 1967, Barbados was still producing 207,000 tons of sugar, which would give you an idea of how important the sugar industry and how important planters and merchants still were in this society. And the police force had to take account of all of that, and Bertie sets this out quite well in Policing a Dynamic Barbados. And a number of other changes taking place in the society. And he mentions the introduction of free secondary education and a number of other humanizing policy initiatives that were taken that made the whole concept of demand at the mass level an issue to which the police force had to respond if the police force was going to supply appropriately. So with the passage of time, we've seen a police force that started as a reactive institution and started as an institution that was framed to protect the interests of a merchant planter elite, finding its ground and its grounding in the society itself and looking after the interests of the masses of the people. Now, as I said, institutions have life, they breathe, they need to be nurtured, they need to be fed, and police forces are no exception. And in a splendid display of intellectual honesty, Bertie pointed to areas where he thought the force had deviated from the remit upon which it was embarked at the time of the first great transformation. And he made recommendations in the book. I'm quite impressed with the recommendations, the dismantlement of the Office of Responsibility and the civilianizing of the force, the force itself, and of course freeing up more police officers to do genuine police work, leaving those things that could be done by civilians for civilians to do. And he even recommended that talking about a police force in the 21st century may not be in sync with the expectations of people who have become very sophisticated and who expect something completely different from their police establishment. So he recommends that instead of talking about the police force, we talk about the Barbados Police Service. Now, I have no problem with that. I always like to say, though, that when you're discarding old furniture, you have to be careful that you don't discard something that is irreplaceable. Sir David and others who are great cricket enthusiasts will recall that we used to have something in the West Indies called the West Indies Cricket Board of Control. And that Board of Control gave us the 3 Ws and gave us Gary Sobers and Seymour Nurse and Viv Richards and Clive Lloyd and all these people. And some very bright people decided that the word control smacked too much of a colonialist mindset. And they thought that it should be removed and we just have the West Indies Cricket Board. We did that. And now we have a set of people who find making 30 runs very difficult. So I just caution that changing the name, while it may on the surface be an innocuous action, we have to bear in mind that psychologically, people react to these things and sometimes take the position that change of name means change of performance and not always change of performance for the better. But I think the recommendations which have been made by Bertie in the book are very good recommendations. And he obviously has the interests of the Royal Barbados Police Force and the community at heart, as his character breathes through the sentences, every sentence in the book. One point he made which intrigued me was the fact that once long-serving police officers, particularly gazetted officers, take their leave of the Royal Barbados Police Force, the younger police officers decide that they are no longer useful for anything. So they're abandoned, and hundreds of years of good creative experience are just thrown aside. And he recommends that some arrangement should be made for these retired gazetted officers to be re-engaged for specific projects in the force. They could, in re-engaging them, of course, they would provide mentoring value for a lot of the young officers, and at the same time, still contribute much to the needs of the force. And I can't disagree with that. In fact, I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think that we are too quick to discard people on the basis of what their birth certificate says in Barbados. But the truth is that times have changed, and life expectancies have got progressively better over time. I think the World Health Organization has embarked on a recalibration of ages. I was quite refreshed to discover that in the proposed recalibration, I am now just treated as middle-aged. But, you know, we have to be careful when we decide that as soon as a man or woman retires, reaches retirement age, that he or she has no more value. That's abandoning years of experience, and the society is invariably the poorer for it. So I think he's quite right for recommending that change, and I hope that those who have ears to hear will hear it. So I think this is a great work. It's a foundational work. I said nobody in the future can think about researching anything on the Royal Barbados Police Force and ignore policing a dynamic Barbados. It is a foundational work to which people must always have recourse. And what also impressed me about it was that it confronted, without consciously setting out to do so, another big challenge that we have had in Barbados and, of course, in the region as well. And it has to do with institution building. One of the biggest problems we have in this society is that we do not build institutions as well as we might. In fact, I know that former Professor Edwin Jones at the Mona campus did some work on institution building many years ago, because it is a challenge. But when you read Policing a Dynamic Barbados, you could follow step by step how this police force was being built and strengthened and made better today than it was yesterday, with the gaze fixed always on tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And I think that students of public administration are going to find this work irresistible in terms of seeing how institutions are built and made durable, because the Royal Barbados Police Force is an outstanding example of that achievement. So I was told to make very brief remarks, and I think I've made them. I will just conclude with this, because I respect this work so highly that I have to say that The Roman poet Horace wrote an ode in which he said that in writing his poetry he was erecting a monument more lasting than bronze. And he delivered himself of the extraordinary statement that he said, "I shall not altogether die. A gigantic part of me will be able to avoid contact with the death goddess." I agree with Horace, because if he were not right, over 2,000 years later, I would not be quoting him here this evening. So he's not yet dead. But I want to say this about policing a dynamic Barbados. It is going to be, since it is a foundational work, and those who want to know anything about the Royal Barbados Police Force will have to have recourse to it. It is going to immortalize Bertie Hinds. So long after he has shuffled off his mortal coil and has been called to higher service, people will have to have recourse to policing a dynamic Barbados. So he too, a good part of him, will be able to avoid any contact with the death goddess. And I want therefore to conclude by thanking him for thinking a work of this kind necessary for Barbados in the 21st century, the first 2 decades of the 21st century. And I hope that, in accordance with the very fervently delivered prayers of Reverend Selwyn Lowe, that the sales will not disappoint, and that the effort will turn out to have been worth it. Thank you very much.
Guests, honorable friend Mr. Stewart, former members of the cabinet, former commissioners, professors. My invitation in writing said you are allowed 5 minutes to speak. As one who made laws, I can't break them. So I wrote what I have to say. And I hope that these remarks will be indeed brief. But let me begin by warmly congratulating Bertie Hinds on this outstanding contribution to the literary landscape of Barbados. Writing a history of policing in Barbados could not have been an easy task. In fact, it must have been a labor of love. But however that may be, this nation's literary landscape has been greatly enriched by the publication of this book, Policing a Dynamic Barbados. Now, although I have not been able to complete my reading of the text which I got on Monday, I am impressed from what I've read by the quality of the writing, the comprehensive content of the text, and the profundity of research and sources as exemplified in the bibliography. I am also impressed that in the best tradition of criminologists, when Mr. Hinds proffers an opinion or an assertion, he is quick to find support for that opinion or assertion in a citation or quotation from other internationally acclaimed criminologists. It is a technique that lends credibility to the writing. Perhaps what resonates with me about the book is Mr. Hinds' location of the discipline of policing and the Royal Barbados Police Force in their racial, social, economic, and political contexts. There were times during the course of my reading that I reflected upon the theory of law as elaborated by Marx and Engels, because Mr. Hinds' analysis makes it clear, especially in colonial times, that the Royal Barbados Force was used as an instrument of governmental policy to keep the black masses in subjugation. Now, before I close, I wish to say that the book prompts me to make 3 observations from different perspectives. First, as chairman of the Law Reform Commission, I strongly support further civilianization of aspects of the administration and operations of the force to reduce delay in the criminal justice process. The Law Reform Commission has circulated for comment a draft bill for disclosure in criminal proceedings. In the accompanying policy paper, we recommend that the government should not proclaim the legislation until it has created a separate reprographic unit staffed by civilians, some of those ladies who went home at the end of 2018, headed by a gazetted officer and supported by state-of-the-art technology to copy, collate, and disseminate the documentation for disclosure. Lack of timely disclosure is one of the great contributing factors to delay in the criminal justice process in Barbados. Secondly, from the point of view of a commission of inquiry that I chaired in Trinidad and Tobago between 2010 and 2014, inquiring into the attempted coup in 1990. And building upon the very important point made by former Prime Minister Stewart just now, at page 191 of the book, Mr. Hinds laments the failure of the force to re-engage the skills of retired officers. He says there is a common expression in the force, and I quote, "Your last day on the job is the last time we want to see you around," unquote. Now that is a very unfortunate and backward attitude. But perhaps I can best express my support for using the talents and institutional memories of retired officers in the following quotation at paragraph 1.567 in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. We said this, quote, "Both the military and police service would do well to establish think tanks on an ongoing basis, including retired heads of the protective services and retired senior officers. These times in Trinidad and Tobago require all hands on deck. There exists a significant number of retirees from the protective services who are willing and able to share their expertise, experience, and institutional memories with currently serving officers. A mechanism should be created to use the talents of these officers in a productive way," unquote. What I recommended for Trinidad and Tobago in 2014, I recommend now 100 times more for Barbados in 2020. And the final matter that I wish to advocate today, from the point of view of a former Attorney General, is that we need to increase the salaries of police officers, nurses, and teachers. COVID-19 has highlighted in the most stark fashion the true value of these professions. So far as the police is concerned, the establishment of that force is 1,500 officers. But it is a commonplace that it is grossly understaffed. It has been unable to attract young and well-qualified persons for enlistment. It is my considered opinion that one of the disincentives to joining the force is the awfully low salaries paid to officers. $28,965 a year to a person joining the force is almost an insult. Less than $2,500 a month. And to compound that insult, an officer receives no financial recognition for having a university degree. If an officer sacrifices to get a university degree and is not rewarded financially thereafter, should we be surprised if from time to time there is a brain drain from the force? Should we be surprised? When I was Attorney General, I was able to negotiate with the force payment of a flexi-time allowance to help to top up the basic salary. But that allowance is variable. It is nothing fixed. Officers need to have an increase in basic salary or a fixed permanent allowance. Now I trust that when Barbados' fiscal position is restored to good health, serious consideration will be given to regrading the police force, the nursing profession, and the teaching profession. And I have to side with the author and say that I not entirely agree with former Prime Minister Stewart. But upon Barbados becoming a republic, not Plato's republic, I look forward to seeing the name of the organization changed to the Barbados Police Service. Thank you.
First time, what a wide audience we have. I didn't think that there were so many people attending. Congratulations to you, Bertie. Obviously, you've got a lot of sales on hand. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, everybody spoke from a position of what they heard. I have to speak from a position of what I saw and experienced. And I will readily make it clear that not only Bertie, but there are several other policemen who stand on almost equal standing with Bertie in his commitment to the force and the capabilities which they displayed. For my part, I saw an opportunity or the possibility that I could one day become Commissioner of Police at a very young age. And I was determined to provide a different police force from the one that I was functioning in. But I decided that I would not wait until that possibility emerged, but rather that I would do everything that I could in the early stages to ensure that a different thrust was developing in the force. And that feeling came, let's be frank, it came just like Bertie, who I think you got the Baton of Honor. And I happened to find myself in a position just before Bertie where my thoughts began to move and move in a particular direction. But I also felt within myself that before approaching the senior ranks of the force, I would do all that I could to develop myself in preparation for any responsibility that I might have. So that meant that, of course, I had to do law first, which is obvious. Then I had to look at administration, which was done at Mona campus. And then I took other steps, the other opportunities, where I was going to develop my understanding of crime. And that materialized largely through the assistance of Sir Henry Ford when I went to Cambridge for a very intensive training period. So when I came back, and of course the Bramshill course and so on, when I came back, it was clear in my mind what had to be done. And I'm grateful to Bertie for having so brilliantly explained what was happening when I became commissioner. And since it impacted on him in the way that it impacted, it was also clear that Bertie was in a similar position where he was thinking along similar lines. I think his book is an excellent book, and I must congratulate him for the presentation and for the authentic way in which he was able to present what was happening in the force. For some time, I thought that I was wasting my time. But time has shown that not only Bertie in his position, but a number of policemen who came up directly under during my tenure have become lawyers. Some have excelled in other fields, and in fact, one has become a judge in Barbados. And we believe that a lot of this started at the point where I was able to identify a number of people to assist me, and I think they're all mentioned in Bertie's book, and then to work with them steadily through a particular course. Bertie has always been an outstanding policeman, so we had no problems with that. And over time, he became one of my outstanding assistants in the research and planning department. And he, together with about 3 or 4 others, provided me with high-quality work, research, to assist me in pursuing the ideas that I had. And I may also add that there were occasions when they looked at me and said, I don't agree. But that was good. Conflict can sometimes be very effective. That was good. So I had no problem with that. And we worked together until we reached a point where we began to see considerable progress within the community, because that was one of the hallmarks. It was important that we reached out to the police, to the community that we were serving, that the policemen had every opportunity to understand the basic principles in policing. And looking at that particular point, I wonder what happens in the United States of America between the police and the public, how they have fallen into the trap where one is pursuing a particular objective and the other is responding aggressively to the injustice of that pursuit. That should not happen in Barbados. The one area that I didn't really fully grasp or sufficiently was the prison, was the reds. I have not heard I have not read so far complete works on the red in Barbados. That will come as long as I'm able. That will come. It's important because that point should have been taken much earlier, but I only had some brief comments here and there and publications that indicated to me what impact that the impression we left with the Commonwealth of Barbados during the incident of the riots, or whatever else you care to call it. So I would say that everything went almost according to what I planned. But there's some weaknesses which we have to work on. So Bertie, I know you've written the book, you've gone ahead, you've done that, congratulations, well done. But there are some other areas that we have to address. And this is particularly so because I'm observing a trend at the moment where, in spite of the fact of having such excellent senior officers, we're still having very serious problems with crime. And the obvious remedy to that is that there is a need for more officers to undergo training in criminal justice and criminal law. That allows the officer or the decision makers to examine very carefully what is happening in the society and work on the kind of interpretation which works to the benefit of all in the society and not just a few, or which does not allow us to pursue the objectives of a just police force. Therefore, the society, the police force, has always to bear in mind that the society must be a just society. And that they must always be conscious of the needs of the people that we serve, and we must respond to those needs without hesitation or without any delay, hesitation, or without prejudging those situations. So there are many areas that have to be addressed, and I hope that we will reach them very soon. I wonder why that fly is doing that to me. I didn't see them doing it to the others. A particular weakness which we have is that our understanding of why crime occurs. We understand, we have some basic concepts, but it's much more complicated and complex than is indicated on the call-in programs and so on. And I hope to be able to give assistance to Commissioner Griffith, not the one in Trinidad. That's a troublesome one there. But Commissioner Griffith of Barbados and his two deputies, because there is definitely a need for more training to be done and more members of the force to be given a pretty high level of training in dealing with the problems that they face. I am sure that the book will be a motivator for many members of the force. I have no difficulty with anything that has been written. These are things that we talked about regularly, and he's done an excellent presentation of that situation. The force in general has to come to grips with that, and we have to work on that more so than some other things that we could ignore for the moment. Crime is not something which is automatic. Nobody was born a criminal. there are certain developments within the society which can lead to criminal activity, where people feel that the society is not just, where people feel that they are being abused because they're not in a position to protect themselves. And a lot of that feeling existed before, and it's still there, especially if we keep focusing on what is happening in the United States. There are people who feel that they are not being given the opportunity that they need for advancement. And we have to use the existence of the various causes of criminal activity and analyze it within a local structure. Therefore, the University of the West Indies ought to be giving us a lot more help than we have had so far in understanding why there is crime. It's not enough to say that we have massive drug abuse. There obviously is something within the society which is generating that desire to become involved in crime, drugs, violence. These are areas that we have to be more fully exposed to, which we have to study and discuss with members of the force, and ultimately with the society. And I'm sure we will find the answer. It caused me a great discomfort to hear a very senior member of our society say that they have no confidence in the ability of the police to stop the crime as it is seen today. There's nothing, those officers that we have at the top of the force, they're all capable of dealing with it. But government has, as the call was made for better remuneration, so too must the call be made for better training. Bertie and myself, I started my training and I paid for mine initially. But there wasn't an offer from the force for us, certainly for me, to get started on the specialized training that I thought that the police force would need. But all these things will still come into shape. What is happening in the force is that it's inaction, and we still have a lot of work to do. But the fact that Bertie took the opportunity and exposed himself in such a way that he became very familiar with his society and was prepared from time to time to discuss various thoughts of his. These facts cannot be overlooked, and the police force is ready for us to explore these facts more deeply. That book will be used as the catalyst for an improvement in the police force, as long as the police force is prepared to support that, and as long as our ministers, particularly those responsible for the leadership of the force, are prepared to explore those possibilities. The force is still in need of considerable training. And the other weakness that is displayed in this society to the force, over the years, and 40, whatever years, I never saw where a serious attempt was made by our respective governments. I'm speaking, both representatives are here. I never saw where serious attempts were made to recognize the work of the policemen in the national honors. They need encouragement. They need to feel that people care about them and that they are not just being used. And it's matters like those which we have to address, and I think we should be able to do that once they have read Bertie's book. I have no idea how much longer that I will be around, but I will. Bertie knows how I feel. He knows the areas that I feel that are being neglected, and if he doesn't do it, I know that others in the force, having been given the stimulus on this occasion, will themselves take up the task of greater respect being shown for the police force, better relations with the community, and an understanding where we're all working together as one for the improvement of all Barbadians. And I look forward to your support from time to time when representation is made, and I sincerely hope that I can rely on you to assist us. But for the moment, today is Bertie's day. He's done a good job outlining all the programs that we were involved in. One or two areas that I will pick him up on, but not before you. I'll talk those areas over with him. But I'm quite sure that Bertie is always willing and ready to speak and to discuss anything that comes to mind and which we think needs to be addressed. So, thank you very much for your invitation. I don't know if he has left, and I didn't want to, a former Prime Minister, not seeing him. He's still there? Let me thank him for his comments which were directed at me personally. Sometimes I will admit that there were occasions when I thought that I wasn't getting support, or the work that was being done was being recognized. I think when you come to speak to them one-to-one, then I get a different picture. And I want to thank him and I see two of my former ministers here who worked with me. They know me that I will speak out on anything. They know I'm frank about these things. And I am willing or was, let's put it that way, to hear any comments, advice, or any censure they had in mind. But the relationship between myself and Mr. Simmons and, the two of them, and the Simmonses, that relationship has been very good, and it has helped me to stay on path with the objectives in my mind. So thank you very much, and good luck to you.
Good evening. My name is Ron Williams. Some years ago, I was interviewed by the late Sir Carlisle Burton. Some of you remember him. And at the conclusion of that interview, he said to me, "I hope you didn't bring back any bad habits." American was implied in the bad as an adjective. I have to confess to one, however, and that is a certain preference for informality, which might be described as American. So with your indulgence, I'll dispense with protocol. Sometime in the 90s, I returned to Barbados, where I had been born and raised, as they say, from the United States, where I had come to maturity. I remember being struck on that occasion by what at the time I deemed a new motto. On the sides of the police cars had been stenciled the words to protect, serve, and reassure. I was struck by this because while I had often seen protect and serve, reassure struck me as being qualitatively different, revolutionary even. I had grown up in protected times when, if I got out of hand, my aunt would call Dick Thompson, a family friend and a well-known officer, to give me a talking to. Her husband would threaten to call another family friend, Sergeant Lunn, at Old Town Station, both of whom are now regrettably deceased. Later, I would develop my own friendships with policemen, largely through the police sports meets where I associated with constable athletes who competed there. So I had no reason in Barbados not to feel reassured by a police presence. I'd also lived in the US, and again, my interactions with the police were friendly. By then, I had become part of that class that is often familiar and friendly with the police. I did, however, have to chair a commission looking into police misconduct in Maryland in 2000, and that opened my eyes to certain possibilities. And maybe it was this that was so reassuring, if you'll forgive the pun, about the new motto I encountered in Barbados. In this excellent book, Policing the Dynamic Barbados, Mr. Bertie Hinds, retired deputy commissioner, frequently mentions, in very powerful ways, the change in policing from a state in which they simply protected property against the potential threat of the masses to a state of policing that sought to equalize and make fair the use of power across the whole society. This, as he explains, had a racial element to it, since the property class was largely white. The book brilliantly describes those social changes that took place after 1937 and traces the gradual ameliorative shifts, indeed contortions, as the society sought to bring equal justice to the justice system. Bertie is well positioned to do this since he was instrumental in developing policing policies that would reflect these dynamic and dramatic changes in social perspective and law. The book comprehensively examines the work done by the stalwarts of that period and certainly enlightened me about the challenges inherent in being the line between order and chaos. Bertie is not, however, content simply to heap accolades upon the police force. He also brings a critical intelligence to the work, one of which J.S. Yearwood would have been proud. I neglected to mention that Bertie and I were schoolmates under the same rigorous administration of Mr. Yearwood at Coleridge Parry. The thing I remember most clearly about Bertie back then was that no matter how hot the sun became, his clothes never seemed to sweat through or lose the starched and polished look with which he arrived in the morning. That same precision and attention to detail is reflected in the research and the writing of Police in a Dynamic Barbados. This book is sorely needed to shed light on the period between 1937 and the early part of the 21st century. That it does this while giving the reader an inside look at what is often an opaque organization simply enhances its value. The author stated that he wanted to disabuse people of the prevalent thought that policing is merely a physical activity and not fundamentally an intellectual one. I would say that he has more than achieved this goal. It is my misfortune that I cannot be with you on the Academy on the Hill tonight, but Bertie, I wish you every success with the book. Such success, of course, is well deserved. And to the rest of you whom I have missed by my absence, good fortune to you all, and good evening.
Of the book, Mrs. Beverly Hinkson.
Good evening, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. Let me just make one correction there. The book is actually published by Arawak Publications out of Jamaica. And you would then wonder why I would be here. Well, let me first say on behalf of Arawak Publications and Bertie Hinds, we want to thank you for joining us here for the launch. Bertie brought this book to our publishing division, and those of you who are aware of our companies, Chattel Books and Book Source, would know that we have been providing publishing services, marketing and distribution services to local and regional authors over the last couple of years. So Bertie brought his book to us and shared the manuscript, and I had one look at it and I said, Bertie, you can't seriously be thinking about self-publishing this book. This is too important. The topic is a very serious topic. And my suggestion to you would be to take it to a full-service publishing house to have this book published. And I then suggested Arawak Publications out of Jamaica. Pansy Ben, who's the publisher there, has done over the years a lot of serious professional books. And I suggested Pansy might be the person to take on this book for you. So we introduced Bertie to Pansy. And somewhere along the line, I believe there's a mutual admiration society going on. Because Pansy took up this book and worked with Bertie over a 6-month period on it. And because of the relationship that builds between publisher and author, because you have to go through all of the editing and the formatting and the indexing, and it becomes a very arduous task for most persons. Bertie, Pansy has asked me to let you know that it was a pleasure working on this book with you. She has indicated that, unlike a lot of authors in the publishing world, that Bertie actually made it very easy to work on this book with her. And she really looks forward to your success in this book, and she wishes you a wonderful evening. And on behalf of our company, We also want to thank you for including us in this and to continue to work with you across the region to make sure that this book reaches as many persons, police, I would say across the entire CARICOM region, and anyone else who might have an interest, libraries and so on, that might have an interest in this. So I just want to say on behalf of Pansy, who unfortunately could not be here this evening, as I said, that she wishes you all success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Simpson. Our featured speaker this evening is Professor C. Justin Robinson. He is a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and currently serves as head of the Department of Economics at the University of the West Indies, Chattel campus right here in Barbados. He obtained his PhD in finance from the University of Manchester in the UK. He also holds an MSc in finance and econometrics from the Florida International University and a BSc in management studies with first-class honors from the University of the West Indies, Chattel campus. Dr. Robinson's research interests are capital markets in developing countries, public finance, financial risk management, and corporate finance in developing countries, the role and future of European derivatives markets, capital market integration in the Caribbean, stock price behavior in emerging markets, long-term financing decisions in the Caribbean, analyzing capital flows to developing countries, commercial banking in the year 2000, and customer satisfaction with public transportation in developing countries. Dr. Robinson currently serves as a director of the Central Bank of Barbados and first vice president of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. We now invite Professor Robinson to come and give the featured speech.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. And my boss is going to go crazy, but I'm going to say all protocols observed. I want to start by congratulating Bertie on this outstanding publication. I know it's been a labor of love because we had a conversation about this pretty close to when I was becoming dean, which is a long time ago. Now, the book is an important book because crime is really an important element of Caribbean society that we often overlook. Whenever I engage the crime statistics for the Caribbean, I'm always surprised because in my own everyday existence, I sort of have a sense that I live in a peaceful place. But the data suggests otherwise. In the most comprehensive study of crime in Latin America and the Caribbean by the IADB in 2018, Latin America and the Caribbean, is the most violent region on earth. And the World Health Organization has deemed crime and violence in the region to be at epidemic levels. Latin America and the Caribbean contains 9% of the world's population, but we account for 1/3 of homicide victims, making us the most violent place outside of war zones. 60% of robberies in our region involve some sort of violence, and 90% of murders go unresolved. And our prisons are among the most overcrowded in the world. And that's not our sense of the Caribbean. Maybe they are skewed by some other members of Latin America. But the harsh reality is that in some ways we may have become used to it, but we live in a relatively violent part of the world. As an economist, we tend to focus a lot on the costs of this crime. And the IMF has done a number of studies, and these costs are quite high. You know, when you have high crime rates, individuals change their behavior so as either to engage in crime or to avoid criminal activity. Households and businesses spend money to protect themselves from crime. Maybe we all have investing in our security systems, our guard dogs. Those monies could be spent elsewhere. Businesses reduce their levels of investment and governments shift resources to tackle the associated problems. The most comprehensive study we have, again, comes out of the IADB 2018, and this suggests that the cost of crime ranges between 2.5 and 3.5% of GDP across Latin America. If we put that into dollars, that's between US 115.3 billion and 171.8 billion. That's several times the size of the Barbados economy. In fact, the size of crime-related costs is roughly equal to the amount of money these countries spend on infrastructure. So roads and all of that infrastructure, we spend roughly, costs of crime are roughly equal to that. Now, the IMF makes a connection between growth in the economy and the crime rate, and they often argue that we could grow economies significantly by at least 3 percentage points if we could reduce violent crime. I'm actually much more intrigued and sort of the nexus with Bertie's book, particularly from chapter 9 onward, as to, in some ways, the lack of a relationship between growth and crime. As I was preparing some data to write a tribute to late Owen Arthur, and I was looking at the economic growth rate in Barbados under his premiership, the data showed that between 1994, when Arthur became Prime Minister, and 2007, the Barbados economy had grown by a cumulative 60%, about 61%. What struck me was in that same period, the Trinidad and Tobago economy had grown by 114%. The economy had actually doubled. But in that same period, the number of intentional homicides had actually grown by 156%. So in a period of record economic growth, we saw a record increase in intentional homicides. And in part 3 of Bertie's book, which I found particularly intriguing, he started really delving into the issue of how crime is evolving in our society, and really the rise of criminal enterprise, really where crime is a way of life for sections of our society, and they are highly organized and sophisticated institutions. And the violence that we see is almost just a part of that doing business. I mean, recently I was reading a book about early Christianity, this old debate about whether Constantine was really a Christian. He only got baptized at the time of his death. And the author was arguing, well, the reason he did that is that in those days, baptism was seen as a full purification. You know, when you became baptized, you were pure, you were free from all sins. And he could not get baptized before that because as Roman emperor, you know, you have to kill people. You have to do violent things. It's just part of the job of being emperor. So you put off the baptism until the very end. And a lot of the violent crime we see, the evidence is, and Bertie begins to allude to that in aspects, it's really just a part of doing business in the modern criminal enterprise. I mean, I used to go to Trinidad a lot in this period to teach, and I could almost write the story about the crimes. They were all the same. And in a sense, I always argue that what we have in the Caribbean and what we are seeing now in Barbados, they're really not murders. They are assassinations. Crimes are committed, of which murder is the one that comes, but it's really just a part of doing business. So how do we, because Bertie's book traces an evolution in the police force. And I had written, it's interesting, I had written about this in some different language, but in the debate introduced by former Prime Minister Stuart Simmons, the service versus the force. And in some ways, what we are seeing at this juncture is that dichotomy between a police force versus a service. There are a number of aspects of crime, so drug abuse and other aspects, where the society really wants the police, it seems they want the police to perform a service. And that may be part of the whole debate we see in the US with the Black Lives Movement and the notion of defund the police, where the notion is that rather than the force aspect, there are many aspects now where people want the police to almost play a sort of social worker function. But now when you are dealing with these organized criminal gangs, is there still an urgent need for the force element? How do you respond to these organized criminal elements? I mean, do we have to go the Giuliani approach, which we don't like? Giuliani felt that in dealing with these criminal gangs and these enterprises, that the police had to become the biggest, baddest gang in New York. And there's some people who argue that that very robust approach worked. So I think Bertie's book is important. He raises this critical issue that we need to understand the nature of crime within our society and build a police force or service that can actually deal with the level of crime that we're dealing with at the point in time in the society. I'm particularly keen on the points he makes about the need for community policing. There's clearly a fractured relationship with the police in an environment where, I grew up in an age where very few of us had any contact with the criminal justice system. As that has become normalized, there is that fracture in the relationship between the community and the police. How is that rebuilt? The physical infrastructure within which police officers work, if they are to balance this. I mean, my kids are getting tired of every time we drive through Hastings that I point out that I signed off on the funds for that new police station. But if we are to have the police play the role we want them to play in our society, police stations and offices cannot be the dingy old places they currently are. I was, certainly as chairman of the NIS, I was especially pleased to be involved in the funding of that citizen security project where we repaired the male barracks at Black Rock and that spanking new police station in Hastings. And I think that needs to become the norm. When we experience crime, we want the police to be there for us, but we ignore the fact that they work really in substandard conditions most of the time. And we must find the money. I mean, I think we must find the money within our resources to radically improve the physical infrastructure surrounding policing. The police need to be able as well, along with that, embrace the new technologies. Policing, I think, is not going to be effective if they can't develop an effective social media strategy. That is the world we live in. So the police's presence, in terms of interacting with the community, the police need to develop a presence within social media. And that cannot happen in the police stations we have now. We need modern facilities with all of the Wi-Fi, the bandwidth that they can engage the society that they are asked to police. Bertie started talking about it, but I thought he could build on it a little more and going forward. And given my own area, I sort of focus on that. But the promise of financial techniques in dealing with quite a bit of the crime that we deal with now. So I remember hearing Friendel Stewart say that in all of his years in the criminal justice system, he's never seen somebody who is arrested say who they got the marijuana from. They just never reveal that information. And it kind of fed into my own childish notions. I always remember that Al Capone, that bad gangster, was never convicted on his violent crimes. He was actually convicted for tax fraud. And in dealing, so we talk a lot now that the crime, so guys get arrested, but they are at the bottom of the totem pole. The kingpins can't be found. And those persons are unlikely maybe to be charged or found guilty for their violent offenses. But as far as I'm aware, under the Finance Administration Act, citizens of Barbados are required to file a tax return. The Barbados Revenue Authority can undertake tax audits. And these may very well be some of the techniques that are needed if we are to penetrate that aspect of the crime, which in some ways might be the dominant feature of crime going forward as we deal with issues of drug-related crime, cyber crime. It's really not just the bad boy on the block or people not managing conflict, petty theft, etc. We are now dealing with an entirely new environment. So I'm gonna wrap up quickly if you've gone through. So I want to congratulate Bertie on the book again. You know, in academia, we often say that systems have a built-in tendency towards what we call entropy. You know, so if you think of a human body as a system, no matter how strong or healthy you are, you get a cold, you get diseases, you grow old, you wither away. So systems, whether man-made or natural, they have that tendency towards entropy. And if institutions are to survive and be effective and serve the society, then institutions must be able to reinvent themselves. I think what Bertie has done a great service is provide us with a history of the evolution of the Barbados Police Force/service as it has sought to reinvent itself as the Barbados society which it seeks to serve has also evolved. So I want to end by where I started. Crime is an important issue in the Caribbean. Many of us take it for granted until we are personally impacted. The fact that crime is such an important and pervasive issue means that policing is an important issue. And the society must find the resources to ensure that our police have the tools they need to deal with the criminal issues that arise in society that they currently serve. And Simmons stole my line, but I will still say it anyway. The pandemic the COVID-19 pandemic has brought that home to us. It wasn't the bankers and all of the big ups who saved us or saved the world during this crisis. It was the frontline workers, the nurses, the doctors, the police. And that should form a catalyst for us to really reallocate society's resources and find the means to ensure that these persons are well remunerated, and also that they can attract the best and brightest. Because if these functions are so important, they need to be able to attract the best and brightest. And those who are functioning in those organizations must have the tools to give up their best. Again, Bertie, congrats and thanks.
Thank you, Professor Robinson. And now to the man of the hour. When Bertie invited me to be his master of ceremonies or mistress of ceremonies, I'm not partial one or the other, I was delighted because he is a person I respect a lot. I respected his professional policing acumen, and as a dear friend, he has been a confidant, and I can call him and talk to him about anything. I know it will never be repeated. I don't know if it's because right now his memory is fading, but I think it is because he is that type of individual that you can talk to, and he holds you so dear that he respects you, your opinions and everything, while guiding you along the way. And from everything that I've heard here this evening, he is still very much respected as a police officer, but more as a human being and a wonderful friend. So I invite the author now to come and talk to us about his book, what he has done, and not to say that this is who we are, but this is what he wants us to be. Bertie?
Thank you, Michelle, my friend. And as I sat there, I don't usually get overwhelmed. Certainly came to the tipping point, but I pulled it back. If you get overwhelmed, then you're defeated. So I am not one to be defeated in such an enterprise. But let me say this evening, I'm dedicating these proceedings to my mother, deceased, 2007. When I broached the news to my mother and my father that I was going into the police force, my father was not pleased. And he found all sorts of reasons for me to remain in the teaching service. But I was very strong-willed. And my mother chipped in and said, boy, if that is your wish, go ahead. I support you 100%. And the Almighty God will be with you. And that gave me even more determination to sidestep my father's wishes and will. And I joined the police force, and the rest is history. So this is her evening. And today is the 26th, and she would have been 102 yesterday. I try to put it as close as possible to her 102nd birthday. She treated me as the love of her heart out of a total of 16 of us under one roof. I'm a very proud number 9. Very proud. And a different equation, another equation to that, 16 of us, or two equations. The only one of us that had anything to do with the law and policing was Bertie Hinds. All of the others steered clear of criminal activity. My mother was, she was better than Professor Alpha at economics. 16 children, and my father was working for $15 a week. Do the math. None of us graduated into criminal activity. Nowadays you hear poverty causes crime and whatnot, but it's the poor socialization within our homes and our communities. So much for that. The reasons for writing this book, you must have heard, but I repeat a few. A pioneering work. Nobody had ever done anything on policing. Little papers here and there and whatnot. So I decided, look, at least be first in something. And I set out to write this work. I broached the idea to the Right Honorable Professor Eugene Barbados and Justin and a group of people at UWI. And they caucused me and encouraged me to go ahead. And today they're here in my presence to see this work launched. So it's pioneering. And to mirror the role and function of the police from 1937 to about 2015, the threshold year of 2015. Of course, the other aspect of it was to show up my legacy. And that is what anyone in public life must strive to do. Leave a good legacy for generations to come. And I believe this is a small step along that way. And I am promising everyone here in Barbados that if the Almighty is with me for the next 2 or 3 years, and my mental faculties, which are very sharp, exists, I will produce 2 more books, one of which I am well on the way to penning. Hopefully you'll be invited to another place when that book is being launched. Sometime, I don't know when, but hopefully as soon as possible. I am not disposed to specifying like Mr. Simmons and Mr. Robinson and Mr. Druitt. I take a lighter tone because almost everything has been said. There's nothing much more for me to say, and they were awesome in their presentations, and they read, the calculus was right on mark. And I feel very proud to know that my superiors have validated this pioneering work. I thank you so much. I will try briefly to connect with this audience. You just don't write a book on your own. You must have had some experiences with persons you would have met, and things would have rubbed off on you. And in your social life, which is critical to achieving it is very important. If you don't have a social life and you want to do things like me, you become a robot. And those who know Bertie Hinds, I love socializing. It gives me the energy to exercise what little intellectual capacity I have. Protocol has been established, but I see one of my friends right in line with me here that I'm compelled to call his name, or 2 of my friends, Mr. Matthews and my personal friend, Mr. Tony Pickering. Don't hide down there. I spotted you ever since. We go a long way back. Just a short story about myself and Tony. He and Larry Tatum met a very good friend of mine, working at Hinds. Case of theft of stuff from down there. Investigations were carried out. Very good investigations. I don't know if my friend Bertie A, crack detective, had done that, but it was a very good piece of investigation. And I felt proud as prosecutor to present that before now Dame Sandra Mason. And the morning the case, Tony and Larry came up and said to me that they want to drop the case. I said, what? Not this. You ain't dropping this at all. When I saw the fear, they were trembling and whatnot, I said, no, I spotted early. I said, let's stop. And I sat them down and I briefed them and took them to court and whatnot. And they gave evidence better than some of the police officers. And that individual was convicted. Large sums of money. Right, Tony? Very large sums of money. And we became friends from then on till now. Now, many of the speakers here today, I would have met in my professional life. Former Prime Minister Stewart. But let me go back to Michelle. She used to chase me down all the time. to get information and report on matters that would happen in the court. She literally ran me down and harangued me and whatnot. And we developed a very good relationship from there. And I was very civil to her because I had written the media policy in the police force, and I knew what good relationships with the press. The press will benefit from you, and if you're shrewd, you will benefit from the press. And I benefited quite a lot from engaging with the press and Michelle. So I had not a second thought but to ask Michelle to come and be a master of ceremonies or mistress of ceremonies, as she would think. Former Prime Minister Stewart, we met in the prosecuting wing in the early 1980s, 83, 84, 85. And we would have rubbed shoulders there. A lot of young attorneys were around at that time. Lots of them are judges now. And people like Leonard Brown will tell you, they can start us. We had a formidable team under Johnny Springer, better known as Johnny Saltbags, Dick Thompson, and so on. To the extent, they used to call us the Dream Team, Fab Lewis and those guys out there. To the extent that Sir Frederick Smith, God rest him in his grave, petitioned Mr. Durant to pay these people for the skill and time they spend in the court out there. Sad to say, Mr. Durant did not take the bait. But many years afterwards, things were improved, and nowadays prosecutors and other people attending court are paid. But we did it gratis and with a sense of, giving to the organization and giving to the public and so on. We did it freely. And one, Mr. David Simmons, now Sir David, having been plucked from District F by Mr. Durant as station manager, one evening, Mr. Stanley Applewhite, God rest him in his grave, called me about 3 o'clock. I was the commander of District F police station. He said, Mr. Hinds, you're transferred to the courts on the orders of Mr. Durant. I said, oh God. Felt good in District F, one of the best station areas that I ever managed. Proper. Even up to today. Up to today. Our relationships up there remain very bright. But anyhow, I packed my bundle and I went down to Johnny Springer and he handed me 36 crime files. You can imagine you get down there at 5 o'clock, 36 crime files in your hand. Not much experience in prosecuting to go out there and face a battery of very prominent lawyers, Mr. Simmons being one. I tried. But I had a lot of experience giving evidence before the court. And sometimes holding on at stations because the station sergeant used to prosecute. Holding on for a week or two at a station when the station sergeant is on leave. But what mattered most at the time, that I was accustomed, I used to live in the courts, giving evidence, investigating cases, crime, traffic, everything, and giving evidence. And that helped my prosecuting ability. But when you come up against formidable defense lawyers like Mr. Simmons, you're in for some trouble. You're in for some trouble, especially when you're a rookie prosecutor. If he had to march now, he couldn't do it. But he taught me a cardinal lesson which has remained with me from then until now. In those days we had the Larceny Act. And in those early stages, I think it was the first month I was down there, case of embezzlement came up. One of the government clerks at one of the courts, I think District C it was, had embezzled some money. And in local parlance, I went to town preparing this case the night. Came to court the morning feeling pumped up. Got a good BA. Put him in the inquiry. All the ends tied off. But I forgot a loose end. And that loose end was mistaken law. Mistaken law. And Mr. Simmons capitalized on the fact that his client was carrying out his duties honestly and in good faith and whatnot. And this criminal offense occurred. And the magistrate upheld the decision. So I learned from then to prepare the prosecution's case and look for every conceivable defense that the defense will come with and try to counter it with evidence. I pass on that to generations of police officers, even throughout the Caribbean, I pass it on. So you have to be prepared. Mr. Simmons, Keith, he told you about our exploits. We're friends from way back when. He admired my presentations in court. And he is a member of my club, North Stars. Very ardent supporter of North Stars. And the relationship has gone so far back that I could think about no other person who I work with as a professional, in a professional manner, and then as a friend to write the tribute to me, the author. But now let me turn to, before we get to the others, to the book design. Many of you would have seen the book cover. Very brilliant, depicting the Caribbean Sea, depicting the Atlantic Ocean, telescope mirroring Barbados, and whatnot. I can probably say that there are two people in this audience now who initially took up the mantle in designing the beautiful book that you will be seeing and displaying permanently in your homes in the future. And may I ask those two youngsters to stand, Tristan Allen and Shay Hinds, my grandson. They're the up-and-coming graphic and fine arts specialists. They did a wonderful job. All these invitations and so on that have been sent out, those two youngsters tackled them and tackled them to my satisfaction and to the satisfaction of many. Congratulations. Staying with the youth, and you haven't heard them yet, but you have seen them milling around here, and you will enjoy the music as it strikes up. The Royal Barbados Police Force Jazz Band. All young people, and there's a history of getting there. When I was divisional commander in the Northern Division in 1997, 98, and to some extent 1999, we had a community policing outreach program where I engineered all principals of secondary schools. And we met on a monthly basis to discuss issues of mutual interest. Drugs had crept into our societies. Lawlessness was creeping in around our secondary schools on mornings and on evenings, selling some spurious substance and whatnot. So we forged that partnership with the principals, came and discussed issues of mutual interest, as I would have said. And I ensured that every secondary school had a community officer attached to it to deal with these nuances, to deal with traffic, deal with children rushing for school buses, and that sort of thing. And I did not stop there. I did not leave these constables up there to the wolves. I adopted Corjan Parish School as superintendent in charge of the Northern Bit. I adopted Corjan Parish School and made sure that every month I came here and speak to the 4th and 5th formers. Guidance generally, what sort of lives to live, how to try to excel in their education. And in doing so, I recognize that Corjan Parish under Mr. Adams had an excellent police band, an excellent school band. So I said, what? Corjan Parish? Well, I will capitalize on this. And I encourage the young students, both male and female, to join the Royal Barbados Police Force band. And they did in numbers. And I will conservatively estimate now that 7/8 of the Royal Barbados Police band are from Corjan Parish. It was an orchestrated and deliberate strategy on my part. No, the talent was there, and Corjan Parish, it goes to my heart. All that I've achieved in life, the foundation was laid here. So you have people like Dexter Norville, who is the assistant superintendent, Sammy Millington, and a whole set of fine young ladies and gentlemen and so on. I not only encourage them to join the police band, whilst in the police band, improve your academic skills. Some of them have gone on to do masters and bachelors and whatnot. So I had to do it for Corjan Parish. Of course, the CP fraternity, many of you are here. The head teacher, present and past students, I recognize you. And we are a force to reckon with. I see in the audience one of my juniors who was school here, Mr. Wendell Ferguson. Here in the audience, and thanks Mr. Ferguson for coming, and he's one that expressed an interest in the book, and for sure he says he will purchase them. It is compelling. It is a compelling work. Even if you look at the cover, the book cover, it catches your eye. It says something good got to be in that. So, so to all retired police officers, many of whom are here, you have people like Betty Lane, Leonard Broom, Tyrone Sargent, and Mr. Charles Blades, and so on. People who I've worked with and worked well, good camaraderie, and so on. And today, we still exude that camaraderie. We can be often found in certain locations, in St. Philip, St. George, and they love migrating to St. Lucie because they get the best wine down there. So we have a jolly good time, social distancing. We always kept that because we knew that when you reach a certain age, you cannot. Although I am vigorous and so on, I still am not taking those chances anymore. So we socialize a lot, and it gives you the stimulation to go on and so on. And briefly to former police officer, Reverend Selden, I have to ask you one question. Why so many policemen gravitate from the police force and go into the ministry? Tell me. A whole set of them. Mr. Simmons is indicating the reason, but I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I see Canon Goodrich smiling. Canon. One thing I know about him, and they stick to the biblical saying, pay some tithes. So I spoke of my personal friend Michelle Affer already. She had to be here. Professor Newton, I'm eternally grateful for your presentation and for you reposing your confidence in me, for taking up the mantle given to you by Impact Justice to have some training done in the region. I think what you benefited from was my stint at RSS, where I knew everybody in the OECS already. Some of these countries I went to 12, 14, 15, 16 times. Yes. Grenada, St. Lucia, Antigua, St. Kitts. So I knew the landscape in the OECS countries. So when Mrs. Newton contracted me to do this work for her, it was bingo to me. I knew the people, I knew the commissioners, I knew the senior officers, and I easily went and delivered. Mr. Simmons, Keith, I spoke of him already. You spoke to Sir David. Let us get to retired Commissioner Orville Jewett. He said a lot about Bertie Hinds. He was the leader in terms of management, strategic outlook, and I was one of his followers, one of his ardent followers. He reposed full confidence in me, and I gave him what he wanted. We were transforming the organization from more of a colonial looking to a modern day police organization. And he entrusted that task, scripting and designing almost every modern management practice in the police force. Contingency planning. We have contingency planning in the police force for any natural or man-made disaster, including Harson's Cave. I spent hours and hours traversing Harson's Cave, mapping it out just in case anybody was held hostage in there or part of the cave had collapsed. I know it like the palm of my hands. And I did not do that myself. John Allen, Deputy Commissioner Williams, Mr. Denver Willoughby, who's here, Wayne Webster, attorney at law and a guru at National Cultural Foundation, Roger Rollins at Financial Crimes Unit, Gyson Mears, Mr. Allen, what's his name, Denver? Attorney at law, Mr. Allen, he's from St. Thomas. That was the group that I had at research and development. Michael Allen, that was the group. I shepherded that group. And the culture that we developed in that research and development department was that you only recognize the boss by title. Whatever research papers we did, share them out. I did a research paper, give it to copies to everybody. Tell me what nonsense I have written there. Criticize me. And it went around. They learned from me and I learned from them. And we gave Mr. Jewett his product. But one thing, as staff officer and research officer, I carried a dual role. One Monday morning, I walked into Mr. Jewett's office around 10 o'clock to brief him on developments at research. And research had an oversight component as the implementation of policies and practices in the force, and I would monitor those. We would monitor the implementation of these policies and practices. So I went into Mr. Jewett's office one morning. I said, yeah, these people look very tense there. And he said, when I finished briefing him, he said to me, Bertie, I understand that everybody in the research department going to university. I said, yes, sir. Everybody is going. Sir, I'm the head of the department, and I allowed him to go, and so on. And we were accordingly and whatnot. So he sat back in his chair and smiled. He said, y'all can go to 1 million universities once y'all get my work done. Leadership, investment in his people, good leadership. Other people in the organization may have said, no, it cannot work. Many nights, initially we were at the old Bridge and Harbor Station, the research and development unit. 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock. Sometimes Kerry would pick up the telephone and call, Daddy, you ain't coming home. But I was doing Mr. Jordan's work because I took his time to go to Cave Hill. So I had to put it back in. I had to put it back in. When people went home at 4:30 and 5, our consolation then was to take that old Moses and go out in the sea, swim, try to get any sea eggs that might be up there, as the case may be. We did that for an hour, hour and a half, and we came back, had a bath, and started back with Mr. Jones' work till 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. That was the commitment that our research department had, and that was the commitment that we made to develop this organization called the police force. Professor Robinson and the university community, you all hit the nail on the head. I cherish my days as a part-time lecturer at the University of the West Indies. I still grace up there sometimes when the Professor Newton called on me. And that was studying and working at Cave Hill campus really brought maturity to my profession. Now, I don't know if Miss Teresa Watson is here. Thank you for coming. I could not leave here this evening unless I recognize Brantley Watson, former commissioner, who could not be here. The two of us work closely, we work well together. He reposed full confidence in me, in the police force as his assistant commissioner, and at RSS as his deputy executive director. He paved the way for me to develop myself further after Mr. Jordan went off the scene. And the last thing Mr. Watson did for me, and I'll be making a special presentation. And the last thing Mr. Watson did for me at the RSS, I was coordinating a course, cybercrime investigation in Grenada for the region, 2-week course. But I'd be in and out of the classroom. I was not a student. I was the coordinator. I knew about cybercrime from my criminological exploits, but I was theory. An added component to that course taught by the FBI was managing cybercrime investigation. Managing cybercrime investigation. So you have your sergeants, station sergeants, your inspectors, your ASPs and whatnot, investigating cybercrime. But the management aspect of it. I floated with Mr. Watson 3 days before I was due to come out of Grenada. I would like to sit in on this course. He said, Bertie, you know, I was thinking that up here, we up here at the executive level of RSS need these skills. The fellas on the ground out there are accruing these skills, and we, the executives up here, must be able to know what is going on out there in investigations, because at the end of the day, we are accountable to the Council of Ministers. And he said to me, stay on for the other week. And I became a student then. I became a student of managing cybercrime investigation. And that creamed off my career. So, anybody inside here who attempts to engage in cybercrime, watch out, Bertie. Mr. Robinson, of course, part of the fraternity, and he did his thing, and he struck the points, the salient points that I tried to bring out. And further to the RSS, there are some people in here from the RSS. I'd invited the executive director. I know Sergeant McIntosh is here, and a few more. I really enjoyed my stint up there. Those on virtual participation, I cannot forget them. Lots of them, because of COVID-19, couldn't come, and I deliberately sent the link to them because I am not encouraging them into this caucus and then they blame me for COVID. So quite a few who I sent out invitations, or I sent it with the Zoom sign on it. Get your grandson or granddaughter to Zoom in and you watch it. So in the virtual participation is Ms. Thompson, and she is represented here today by her daughter Cherish and her sister Ariel and family there, and she worked tirelessly in penning, data processing what I had been. Thank to her very much. Mr. Mylan Sprayer, who is Reverend Mylan Sprayer, he's my first cousin. He wanted to be here, but I told him, no, I'm not encouraging you down here. I don't want any funeral to go to. As well as Mr. Gilbert Graves, former immigration officer. We pitched marbles together. He's a Lucy man, just in case people don't know. We grew up in the same district, so I gave them a command not to come. I sent the Zoom for them. They're getting on in years. So, Mr. Curtis Goodrich, Canon Goodrich, again a product of Coaching Party School, and he had to be included. I couldn't bring him here and just allow him to sit down. He's present chairman of the board after I demitted that. And what I can see that a good job is being done here between himself and the principal, Sandra Goodrich. We have created a very good professional relationship with school. She can call on me anytime, and I will respond to court inquiry. Now, in closing, let me say that it seems that everyone enjoyed this evening. It was not only interesting, as you look around and see the faces, it was intriguing. You know, some people, is that true? When certain statements were made, people not in the constabulary or in the criminal justice system, you know, this sigh of, oh God, that's true. These things happen. Yeah. So I thought that you were a wonderful audience, and I think that when you purchase your books, follow the lead of Professor Newton. She was one of my principal reviewers of the text before it got to the publishers, and she gave it thumbs up. There are one or two more persons in here who engage in the reviews, because you write a script, sometimes you write some nonsense in it, you can't believe it. You can't believe it, especially when you set up your table 8 o'clock at night and you're working through to 2 o'clock and the coffee begins to wear off you around 11, 12. You write some nonsense that you get up the next morning, you wouldn't believe it. You have to pull back, you know? Yeah. So I spent many nights in my patio between 8 and 2 o'clock trying to perfect this. But it had to be edited, and I cannot forget Dr. Ronald Williams, my contemporary here. He did some editing. Former headmaster Alvin Adams, and teaching expert Mr. Martin Ramsey. Those people edited the English language for me. Very brilliant people. Not that they had to do much, but yeah, not that I do. But you never advise yourself, right? Never advise yourself. So, so I'm eternally grateful for those three gentlemen and all those who reviewed the script. Dr. Pearson Broom, yeah, he was one of the persons. Mr. Grantley Watson, I had to get a person in the discipline to review the book, and he reviewed it and said thumbs up. I engaged, to some extent, to a lesser extent, the commissioner in Grenada. He too is a criminal justice practitioner. And a couple more I engaged in the review. And they did a wonderful job. And it's heartening to know that my work has been so profoundly sanctioned by this august group here this evening. And I thank you so very much. And as my mother predicted, against the wishes of my father, the Lord be with you. And I spent 40 plus years in the police organization, held at gunpoint. In my second year in the police force, myself and Corporal Canon Vaughan, Winston Vaughan, he was a detective at District E. We were patrolling Gibbs and Mullins one night. We were doing a 1 to 5. We were doing a 1 to 5 in plain clothes. We were traversing Mullins Beach, and a white gentleman and a white lady. The gentleman jumped up as we crossed the beach and put a gun on us. We all doing around my place and whatnot. And he got the gun at the port at us. He told his wife, go and call the police, 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 and whatnot. Well, of course, I had a contingency plan in place in case I had on some shoes, I would flick some sand in his face and then wrestle him to the ground. Huh? You were taught these things at training school. So I say, he's not going to kill me, no way. So the lady, his wife, the lady we discovered was his wife afterwards. She called District E Police Station. And the station orderly, 504 Surrey Armstrong, was able to give a perfect description of myself and Detective Corporal Vaughan. And that saved our lives. I would have been a corpse many years ago. My father was right to some extent. But my mother, to use this term, was even righter. The Lord shall be with you. And he was with me then and today. And hopefully he's with you all this evening. You're a wonderful audience, and I thank you. God bless. Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Griffith is here. We'll say Mr. Watson and
We will now do some presentations to a few people. While this is happening, we will invite members of the Royal Barbados Police Force Jazz Band to set up. They will be entertaining us directly after the presentations. The first presentation will be to Mr. Grantley Watson. To accept on his behalf is his daughter, Tricia Watson. So, Tricia, if you could come forward so that we can make the presentation to you for your father, a former Commissioner of Police.
thank you, Tricia, for coming. This is, I can't say a token of appreciation because it is not small. Small in size. Small in size, but a bundle of goodness in it. And Mr. Watson, as I would have said, gave me opportunity force. It was a tower of strength. He always reposed full confidence in me. He could not be here today, and I could not leave him out from this ceremony. I believe he will be a proud person today, and Mrs. Watson and yourself will be very proud. Thank you.
You give me a microphone at your own peril. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. Unfortunately, my father could not be here today, but I'm here with his blessing, and I know that he supported this project unreservedly. I want to myself thank you. First of all, I'm going to read this book first. Okay. And I have a child who's looking forward to reading this book, and she's a mere 13, so hopefully we can reach many among that age group. I want to thank you for always being gracious to me. I observe several former senior policemen who similarly have been gracious to me and whom I've known throughout my life. And it is a pleasure to receive this book. We chatted at some point while you were writing, and I look forward to you completing the project. I look forward to you completing your other 2 projects and some additional things, we hope. Thank you very much, and congratulations, and I also wish you excellent sales.
Thank you.
Our second presentation will be to Ms. Sonia Goodrich, the principal of the Corrigan Parish School.
this is vintage Courage and Park. Former student, former member of Board of Management, and Principal, Mr. Son, the Goodrich. I present you this gift for you, your teaching staff, and all pupils now and in generations to come. It's a pleasure of mine, and as I told you, I could not leave out Courage and Pride. Most of what I have achieved in life is because I was educated here on this beacon up the hill.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. He says to come first? The other way? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Now, I know that I have never said this, but as a child, I was terrified of police. And I had to be because my great aunt, Bernesta Brathwaite, was one of the first 3 ladies in the force. She terrified me, so I know when she said to go to school and learn, that I had no choice. But I was also connected to a lot of officers because my grandmother was the cook at the training school, Eudora Brathwaite, Liotta. And every time we looked around, somebody from the force was coming just to hail her up. They remembered the time she gave them extra food. So each time there was a police van outside, I was like, oh Lord, what happened now? Eventually I got to understand though, that they loved them both. So yes, I know I never shared those stories, but policing is definitely in my family. And although both of them are now deceased, we were happy to be connected to the force. Now, about 3-4 years ago, when I came to the school, Mr. Hinds was the deputy chairman of the board, and they did a really good welcome. I probably should have added that I had one other scary story. I looked around and I saw Leonard Broom. I don't remember what rank he was at. But when I was teaching at Queen's College, I had a student who was extremely bright. And one day I got a call to say that this officer in this full uniform was downstairs, and I went downstairs not knowing who he was. I honestly got terrified. I'm thinking, was I speeding on the way to work this morning? And he said, he called me by name, and I said, yes, sir. He said, oh, Alison just sent some essays for you to mark. That was the time that my heart went down. Here I was thinking I was in trouble, but all he was doing was bringing some essays from his daughter, who was doing sixth form geography at the time. So I've had some run-ins with officers, but thankfully all of them have ended well. And I want to say that here at Courage and Parry, we are extremely happy. We are thankful for the gift, and we are extremely happy to have been connected to so many officers. We know the entire top rank of the force right now are all old scholars, and we know that it has produced excellent students and excellent leaders. So on behalf of the Courage and Parry School, we want to thank you, and we want to wish you God's continued blessings. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Short. Music, short.
It is like 10 minutes.
Okay. You can tell the audience.
Okay. Well, this is one of the top-rated orchestras in the world. I have an affiliation with the Royal Barbados Police Force Band. Bertie, you remember that? My affiliation with the Police Force Band? Okay. I'll tell you about that. You know, but I'll remind you. Anyway, that affiliation, she's now 34 years old. So that's how long I go back with the Police Force Band. But one of the top orchestras, and one of the joys, not just on Christmas Day, which we all look forward to, but many times you go, it's a delight to listen to the Royal Barbados Police Force Band. And the jazz aspect of that is no different. So they're going to entertain you for the next couple of minutes. Then we will have our closing remarks, our closing prayer, and we'll invite you to have refreshments. So sit back and enjoy the next couple of minutes with the RBPF Jazz Band. Ladies and gentlemen, the Royal Barbados Police Force Band. And now to give us closing remarks will be Miss Carrie Hinds, who's the director of the Department of Emergency Management, but also perhaps one of the favorite the favorite ones of the Hinds family. Come, Carrie.
Yes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we've had a long evening. Policing a Dynamic Barbados by Bertie A. Hinds. This pioneering work of art traces the past and present in policing in our dear land Barbados, offering to its readers an insight into the world of policing from 1940 to 2015, along with a valuable concluding discourse on how we may wish to envisage and implement a much improved police service. This insightful articulation is indeed an invaluable contribution to the body of knowledge in policing, and today we have witnessed the launch of Mr. Bertie Hinds' work. This is a special occasion with contributions from many persons, some of whom are not present today, but whose patience, time, and effort have been truly invaluable and sincerely treasured. Nothing is possible without God Almighty. The author made such reference when he stated, "I give thanks to Almighty God who gave me the wisdom, foresight, conviction, and resolve to pursue this pioneering work." It is equally fitting that we commence this evening's proceedings, and we will close by thanking God and recognizing his presence in our lives. We've heard Professor Velma Newton, Mr. Neville Keith Simmons, the Right Honorable Frondell Stewart, Sir David Simmons, Mr. Orville Joint, Dr. Ronald Williams, Ms. Beverly Smith-Hinkson, Professor Justin Robinson, and the author himself. The speakers today spoke with a frankness. They were very thought-provoking and forward-thinking. Many of them were integral in the honing of the skills and growth of the author. Your presence here as speakers was definitely by design. And I'm happy to say that academia and the justice system in Barbados has been richly rewarded by the addition of this work to the body of knowledge in this country, and I would say in the region. This evening, we are here, and fittingly so, at my father's alma mater, the Coach-and-Parry School, to celebrate his success, and in many ways, our success. He has realized a dream. In his own words, and I quote, "My work is complete with a triumphant smile after several months of pen and papyrus." While persons may assume that I am biased when it comes to my father, his profession, his life, he's quite cognizant of the fact that I have always been openly one of his most constructive critics. Today, I join each of your distinguished and revered colleagues that have preceded me this evening, and those family, friends, colleagues, and well-wishers, and I dare say critics, here in both the face-to-face and virtual audiences by saying, well done. You have taken to heart the saying, beliefs are our anchor, go and explore. You have definitely made an indelible mark on the policing and expectantly on the academic landscape in Barbados. We are immensely proud of this most recent of your many accomplishments. I encourage everyone here tonight to purchase this literary work of art. Inform your friends. I think we have had an evening full of warm wishes, frank discussion, but I think it is now time for us to proceed to the refreshments, but not before the closing prayer. I thank you, all of you, for being here tonight to support my father.
We're almost there. I'm going to invite Canon Curtis Goodrich, Director of the St. Lucie Parish Church, to come and give us a closing prayer. After that, you can join us for refreshments on the outside. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience.
Let us pray. O God, the fountain of all wisdom and knowledge, we give you heartfelt thanks for your love and goodness toward us. We thank you at this time for those who by their writing have enriched the lives of others. And we are bound at this time to offer you thanks for the inspiration, insight, and given to your son Bertie to author the book Policing a Dynamic Barbados, which was launched this evening. May it be of great benefit and a source of enlightenment to many. Bless the author and all who in any way contributed to it. May it for generations to come enrich the lives of many in this land and abroad. This we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. May the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you this day and remain with you always. Amen.